Okay, so there are a couple of cars on the desk here. Two might look familiar to you from the basement testing I've done so far. The Kyosho Laser ZX-RR and the Schumacher Cat 2000 EC. These had some bugs I had to work out. Turns out the steering servo on this went a little bit glitchy, so I had to replace that. And with the Cat, I made a few setup changes, so I've been testing that a little bit. And then I figured I would also do a few videos on my two-wheel drive buggies. So right now, the way that I'm splitting this up is I'm going to do mid-motor and rear motors. For the mid-motor vintage two-wheel drive buggies, I have my Kyosho Rampage Pro E that I've run at the Vintage Off-Road Nationals a few times. I have claimed in the past that this is my favorite vintage two-wheel drive buggy. And I think that's still the case, even considering the other vintage two-wheel drive buggies I have, although the Kyosho Pro X comes in a close second. The other mid-motor two-wheel drive buggy I have is the Tekin RC10 mid-motor conversion right here. I did a whole build series on this not long ago, I think last year, and this is also built to be a runner. So at some point I'd like to run this at Vonats. So I figured I can compare these two for you. There aren't many, if any, running videos I've seen anywhere on YouTube showing the Tekin RC10 mid actually running in any capacity on a track or even for simple testing like this. So I figured I could at least also do that for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the Tekin first, and then I will do the Kyosho. Okay, so we're going to take Tekin here. I'll just go through the process of you guys seeing what it takes to actually get this going here. I'll just put the wing to the side. So when you do testing in the basement, you don't need to have the body and the wing mounted. You're not going so fast that aerodynamics really matter, so you can put that stuff aside. Okay, bring this up, move this in. There we go. Put this down like this. That goes in. And what do we got here? That's, let me make sure I got that right. That's negative, positive. Always make sure you got your leads correct, or things go up in smoke. Okay, so we got this. And positive, come on. Okay. So, oops. Here we go. As a side note for this car, so right now I'm running the Turnigy Trackstar Vert Gen 1 17.5 motor. I found that motor to be really good with a boost. It's not so great if you're just running blinky mode, but if you run it with boost, it's actually a pretty good motor. And it's cheap. It's like 35 bucks or 40 bucks. I did also try running the Tekin Redline Gen 4, I think, 17.5 motor. Feels like a really nice motor. It's certainly smoother than this, but it doesn't. It's not quite as punchy when playing around with timing and boost profiles. So I just threw the Trackstar back in there. Actually, really good motor for the money. So here we go. So this has a hydro drive in it. That should help it on low grip surfaces. Pretty good steering, right? Really, really tight cornering radius here. So let's park it off to the side and in. Look at that, very, very tight. And you can tell there's quite a lot of caster there. I might want to maybe back off a little bit on the caster. You see the front wheels tilting a lot under steering. That comes from a high caster. Okay. And I do have this set up with the Active Link rear suspension, so it's not just a normal mid-motor buggy. It does have basically active camber gain left to right, so as the chassis rolls, the rear tires maintain an even contact patch with the track surface. And I also did a custom rear tower, so I can move the shocks to the back of the chassis rather than sort of in the middle, if you will, where the normal RC10 shocks would mount. This allows me to fit big bores on the chassis while also putting a hydro drive in there. It's pretty tight back there. But it does handle very nicely. Pretty cool car. Let's see how it jumps. I set up a pretty steep jump here. Let's see how it does. I expect this to slap pretty hard. Oh, that's actually not bad. It's a pretty light chassis because the Tekin mid-motor comes with its own molded chassis. The molded chassis are lighter weight than the aluminum chassis. See, the front there got a little bit bouncy. The front shock setup on this isn't so great. I think I have maybe not quite the right shock body and shock shaft length, so I had to do some weird things. Oops, to the front. That's not good. This one also doing something weird with the trim. I'm always having trim issues here. So that's... Let's try that. Nope. Yeah, alright, that's not too bad. Yeah, see, the front is a little bit bouncy there. I think I have too much pack on the with the front damping. Oops, man, I'm all over the place today. That is uncharacteristic of me. Alright, a little bit to the right. But front bouncing notwithstanding, it's actually pretty good. Does need some work though, that's for sure. Do another one. Alright, let's go around here. Very, very tight cornering, very sharp cornering, especially low speed. Just comes right around. Something with the steering though. Maybe I gotta do the same thing with this that I did with the laser. Because I'm using the same kind of servo in this car. And these servos, these Trackstar, is it the D99X? I really like them because it's a low profile servo. It's very fast, like 0.08 second transit time. Pretty good torque, around 110 or so ounce-inches of torque. And it's cheap. It's like 30 bucks for the servo. But you kind of get what you pay for. They're a little fragile. If you beat them up too hard, then they tend to go bad. So, you know, I may have to replace that one too. But because they're so cheap, you can get a whole bunch of them for the same amount of money you'd spend on a high-end servo. So as long as you're nice to them, you can actually make them last, you know, a pretty long time. Very sharp off-center steering. So I might want to actually change the expo settings on my steering to numb that out a little bit. Otherwise it kind of feels a little bit nervous going off center. So when I'm driving just between this gap here, you know, I don't want to punch it too hard, because if it's not aligned just right and I correct a little bit, I'll just go straight into, you know, one side or the other. It's okay. It's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. So this would be an interesting car to run for sure at Vonats, but not my first choice. But of course I would not have known that if I hadn't have actually gone through the whole process of building this thing and testing it out. So maybe at some point, one of these years, I'll run this thing after I've sort of gotten my full satisfaction out of my Kyosho cars. And I generally feel that way about pretty much every one of my vintage RC10s. Like when you build them and you run them, it's like, okay, they feel good, And you know, it's hard to find fault with them, and then you try something else like a Kyosho Pro X or a Rampage Pro E, and you're like, oh my goodness, you know, it's so much smoother, and it doesn't have the kinds of like chassis slap issues or setup complexity issues or anything. Like, you can just set this up well and it runs, and you don't have to play any stupid games like you do with the RC10s to get them to work right. So as much as I like the RC10s, they're really not nearly as good as either the Kyoshos or frankly the Losis. I don't have any Losis, but the Kyosho buggies are a bit like the Losis in terms of like the chassis width and the geometry and so forth. They're just a lot stronger. The plastics are a lot stronger on the Kyosho cars than the Losi cars. I did make some setup changes to this compared to last year at Vonats. I've been playing around with the rear shock angle and also with some spacers under the rear inner hinge pin brace, because if I add some spacers under here, then basically that will reduce the anti-squat at the rear, which can help you on low grip surfaces. So anyway, plug this in, and let's see, what do we got here? Rampage Pro E. Cycle it twice. Oh, there we go. Alright. So this car it's not quite as tight of a cornering radius as a Tekin car, at least at low speeds, but it's still plenty tight. And this thing jumps nice and level, no funny business. You know, it doesn't slap the ground or anything. None of the weird stuff like with the front end here, having too much pack and bouncing and all that bullshit. It works. See, you can get a ton of air and it just lands perfectly. Now granted, I could probably fiddle around with the shocks on this thing to make it better, but as it is right now, this thing is just awesome. Can't complain. And it's arguably more tunable than probably any of my other two-wheel drive buggies, vintage ones, because of all the little games I can play with the rear suspension geometry. You can kind of do it on the RC10, but it's harder. See, every single landing is just perfect on this thing. Alright? And that's what's so good about this car. It's consistent. And it's smooth, and it's fast, and it corners great. That's why I have a hard time finding any car other than this one to run at Vonats. Because although, other cars might look cool and interesting, in terms of performance, they just don't compare. So that's why I really like this car. I'm probably, since I already ran this one a few times, I'm probably going to take my Pro X, which is the rear motor version of this car. That's also very good. But I'll make a video comparing the Pro X to one of my rear motor RC10s, and you can see that. So, okay, that's it for now. Thanks for watching.